5 minutes instead, I think we should probably get going. We got a lot to cover, and it is late in the day 3 at Tech Ed. Man, you guys are probably tired and dragging. I know. We'll get through this, don't worry. It won't be that painful, I promise. My name's Dave Cliff. Just want to introduce myself before we get going. I'm a program manager on the product team at Microsoft, working on workflow in particular. And if there's one thing that you need to know about me before we get started, it's that when it comes to vacationing, cruise ships are my number one choice. I love cruising. Cruising, yeah, see, I got the thumbs up here in the front row. Love that. Cruising is awesome. I love it. So in fact, earlier this year in February, I actually went on a cruise with my wife. We thought it was going to be the dream vacation. This was going to be the epitome of vacations. We were taking a cruise to Tahiti, to Bora Bora, French Polynesia. It was going to be glorious. And so the time's leading up to the cruise, and we're getting excited about it, and literally a week before, my wife starts to feel a little bit funny. She says, maybe I should go to the doctor, get checked out. I said, oh no. So she went to the doctor. Sure enough, she finds out she's pregnant. You got to be kidding me. Like a week before our dream vacation? This is ridiculous. Anyway, don't get me wrong, I'm super excited to be a father. It's actually our first child, so I mean, hooray for that, right? Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. But I mean, right before our dream vacation, right? I mean, and she was feeling fine up that week before the cruise. And then sure enough, we go on the cruise. We're in this, beautiful paradise. And she starts to feel just like crap. She wants to throw up all the time. Like, this is not how you want to spend your vacation. And so effectively what happened is, now we look back on that vacation, and rather than looking at these beautiful pictures of paradise and sunsets and gorgeous colored water, now my wife looks at these pictures and honestly makes her kind of want to throw up in her mouth just a little bit every time that she looks at these pictures. Now, you're probably wondering, what does that have to do with workflow? Well, let me tell you. The fact is that a number of you out there have used workflow before. You've used it in one product or another. You've used it in the kind of DubF offering that we have in .NET. And some of you had a great experience with it. And you look back on it and you're like, wow, this was great. I'm really glad I used this technology. And then there's others of you who are coming to it and you're like, honestly, it kind of made me want to throw up. And I hope you didn't have that visceral reaction to using workflow, but the fact is, we know there are some people with those experiences. But what I want to answer today is first the question, why am I here? So why are you here in this session right now? Well, we recognize that people are coming at this from a number of different angles, in a number of different backgrounds. You've got a number of people who have used workflow before, you had a great experience with it, and you just want to know what's next, what's on the horizon. And there's just another subset of you that you've used workflow, used DubF. The experience was so-so, wasn't easy, there were some missing features. And the great thing is this session is absolutely for you too. We're going to go over some of the top pain points that we've seen in users using workflow today in .NET. Oh, did they get it right? We're still working on getting it right, and that's where you come in, all right? There's the next set of you who are doing workflow, but you're not using DubF. So you just kind of want to know what's coming down the line. What does the future of workflow in the middle tier look like? And then there's a number of you who have probably started hearing this AppFabric term, and you're hearing a lot about it, in fact. And you just want to know, how does DubF fit into this AppFabric vision, this middle tier vision that we have? And the great thing is, no matter where you are coming from here, this session's for you. I think you get a lot out of this session. I'm really excited to deliver it, and I really hope that you will continue to provide us feedback such that we can iterate, we can make things better. This stuff is all going to be raw. It's all new bits. Hopefully it's stuff you're familiar with somewhat already in terms of the experiences, but it is new, so provide us feedback. Here's how we're going to tackle this today. So as I mentioned, I'm going to address some of the top customer asks, or pain points, really, pain points that we've heard people come to us and give us feedback on WebF4. I'm going to make sure that we go over some of those in detail and go through the list. The next is we're going to spend a big chunk of time understanding what workflow in AppFabric looks like. But before we do all that, before we jump into the details here, let's step all the way back and discuss why workflow is interesting and how it's used today in kind of the traditional WebF4 and AppFabric server case. So why workflow? Well, we actually think there's kind of 4 core value props to WebF. There's the fact that you can model long-running processes. And these aren't just kind of system processes that are, going off and doing some work and then maybe going away for a while, waiting for that work to get done, that kind of long-running work. This is also for human approval tasks, human approval scenarios where you've got processes and you need your users to be able to interface with your workflow. And those are core scenarios to what workflow provides. It provides a great framework for building long-running apps and this kind of episodic execution. I execute some amount of code, I stop, I wait for some input, I go away, I persist my state to a store, and then I come back later. The next is around coordination. And this is actually, the way we think about coordination is actually a little bit more than just I'm orchestrating a bunch of service calls. The fact is that in your apps today, you're probably writing a ton of coordination code for what I would call rainy day scenarios. And these are scenarios where things didn't go exactly as planned. Not everything followed the happy path. I had to, compensate for a particular piece of work that was done, roll back that piece of work and maybe do something instead. Or, just dealing with kind of intermittent issues where you need to be able to retry. Workflow is great from that perspective in that it is a coordinator of all of these different pieces, and it gives you a nice model for modeling your coordination work. Next is around transparency. And what I mean here is that what workflow provides is not just application transparency. So I can very clearly see what my application is doing. I don't have to go spelunk through millions of lines of imperative code to understand what this process is actually doing. I can very clearly see what the process looks like and therefore what it's actually responsible for. The other part of transparency that workflow provides in particular is the ability to kind of see which state or kind of what is the state of my process. Where am I at? I've gotten past this step and this step and this step, but I haven't quite gotten to this one yet. Well, that's great. That's actually really easy to see with workflow. And then the final point around here is around kind of these customizable processes. So in cases, the scenario I think of here is like SharePoint. SharePoint workflow is a great kind of customized design experience for a SharePoint user. They interact in terms of creating tasks, updating list items, a DSL that they're comfortable with, that they're used to using. And workflow provides both the kind of DSL, so you can build your own DSL on top of our composite activities, but then it also provides you a rehostable design experience such that you can pull that into your app yourself. And that's great. That's all kind of value. So hopefully this is somewhat of a review to you already. Now let's look at the Workflow 4 implementation of this and how workflow services interact with AppFabric server. There's really a couple of steps here. The first is I'm going to go design a workflow service, and I'm going to do this in Visual Studio. And what we give you out of the box is a XAML-X experience for building a workflow service. By show of applause, can I hear how many people have actually built XAML-X services before? I figured this is the most applause I'm going to get all day, so I appreciate it. All right, so we've got a few of you who have gone up and built XAML-X services, hosted them in AppFabric server before. So the first step is you're going to publish that XAML-X to AppFabric. And we're going to do a bunch of stuff internally to kind of wire things up for your app. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to infer the contracts that your workflow exposes and expose them as effectively a web service. And we do that by walking the definition, looking at receive and send reply activities, and exposing that contract via WSDL. The next thing we're going to do, we're going to open up endpoints, but then we're going to also wire up the persistent store, the tracking store, such that you can leverage all of that nicely and easily for free as part of AppFabric Server. Then finally, you get the opportunity to, interact with a nice management UI with the AppFabric dashboard directly within IIS in order to manage your instances, whether it's suspend, resume, cancel instances, kind of check out the state of how your workflow process is going. Hopefully this is all recap, because the next thing that I want to do is I want to actually jump into Dave Cliff's top 10 workflow asks for vNext, all right? And if I had some music, I would kind of cue the music right now. Can I cue the music right now? No, he's saying I can't cue the music. All right, never mind. I don't have Paul Schaefer beside me. That's all right. All right, here we go. The top 10 workflow asks for vNext. Hopefully these will resonate with you. Number 10, I want more activities out of the box. I want things like, I don't want to have to write send mail again. I don't want to have to write kind of HTTP activities or database activities. I want these provided for me because these are core building blocks that should be part of the platform. Great, we heard your feedback. Absolutely, we're going to continue to work on the activity set. Number 9, building a custom instance store is too difficult. So what this is we provide a nice SQL instance store out of the box for storing your workflows, your workflow instance state. The fact is, when you have to jump to building your own kind of customized version of that, it's pretty frickin' hard. And we can improve that. We can make it better. We can provide you with good kind of samples as to how you would build some canonical cases. And we can absolutely improve that experience. Number 8, we are going to make it easier to author large workflows. All right, and this one actually came up to me just today. Just this morning, I was talking with a customer, John from Turner, and he was telling me, this is the main reason why I didn't adopt Workflow 4. This is it. I have a ton of large workflows. I can't navigate them. The perf isn't what I was hoping. I can't kind of get around in there. I'd rather just be looking at code. And that's fundamentally why he chose to write his project not in Workflow. We want to make that easier. We want to make it such that large workflows are a good experience within DubF. Number 7, okay, built my workflow. Now I want to go unit test it. What do? Well, the fact is, we haven't provided you a ton of guidance up until now. But the great thing is, people like Ron Jacobs, sitting down here in the front row, is providing awesome things on Codeplex and in other kind of areas in order to make this easier. So we're absolutely addressing this one as well. Number 6, I want you to turn the crank on the designer experience. Make it better, make it more intuitive, make it easier to use. Great feedback. If there's particular pieces that you think are hard and you think you want fixed, come talk to us. We want to make sure we keep moving that forward. Number 5, I already have a contract. Let me use that one. I'm building a workflow service. I know the contract. Why do I have to go off and drop a bunch of activities and then kind of map them myself up to the contract? That's a great point. We want to absolutely address it. It's actually one of the top 5 that we've heard in kind of processing the customer feedback that we've heard from DubF4. All right, the next 2 are kind of related. Number 3 and number 4. These are all about versioning of long-running processes. And one that we've consistently heard from customers, you got to make it easy for me to version these long-running processes. Now, number 3 is kind of, I want to create my process, my new version, and host it and keep all the existing ones running. That's cool. We heard that fairly commonly. The other one, number 4, is I want to be able to create a new version and then update everything that's running to that new version. And we've heard that one as well. And we will absolutely want to address these as part of the framework. Number 2, all right, we're getting to the big ones now. My project type is C#. What's this VB thing? I hear some laughing. Why? Yeah, I know. This is feedback we got. This is one we're absolutely actioning. We want to make sure that you can leverage, the intuitive expression language that you're used to leveraging with your projects. And the number 1, show me state machine. I've always wanted to do this, actually. Kind of a Family Feud type deal, where you like point up randomly into the sky and just kind of say, show me potato salad. And it just kind of shows up. That'd be great. So anyway, I got to do it this time. Show me state machine. And there it is. State machine. We've got it coming. In fact, it's already released. We released it as part of a platform update to .NET 4. And Mr. Ron Jacobs is actually doing a great session tomorrow. When's that, Ron? 10:30 something. I've got it at the end, actually. Anyway. I'll be there. Yeah. Ron should be there. If he's not, something's happened. Call his emergency contact. All right. What I want to do now is I actually want to deep dive on a couple of these just to give you a flavor of the experience that we're hoping to offer with a couple of them. So we're going to look at building workflow services from a contract and how do I deploy a new version of my process. So actually, before I move on, did these resonate with you as Workflow 4 developers? Yeah. vNext. Is vNext AppFabric or what? Yeah. And it is intentionally vague because we have a couple of release trains we're working towards. We're working on the next version of Visual Studio. Next V. Oh, Next V. All right. Maybe that's more intuitive. I'll try that one next time. All right. So we're going to look at a couple of these in particular and do a bit of a deep dive. So the first is around contract first authoring of workflow services. I want to start with a contract. I want to implement a workflow service that matches that contract. I want to do that easily. And I want to be able to validate that my workflow actually matches that contract such that I get kind of a nice workflow design time validation experience for this. So let's take a look at this, what this looks like in our design experience. And I clicked the wrong thing. That one? Survey says. All right, here we go. All right, so here I am in Visual Studio. And what I've got is basically just a simple flow chart. And actually, before we even get into that, let me first show you just a couple of things. So we've got a nice little designer experience to kind of just start to improve the designer usability of flowchart, this kind of auto-connect feature. And then you also notice that I'm being prompted to enter a C# expression. You can now commence clapping. Thank you. I really didn't even have to prompt that. I really appreciate that. Thank you. So you've got this kind of a couple of little designer things, and again, we're turning the crank here. We're trying to make the experience better. All right. So if I wanted to start using a contract that I've previously defined, I could go jump into let's say this iPolster service. All right. So I'm gonna stand up a service that handles running a poll for me. So I can start the poll and I can have people vote on the poll. And it's got a couple of things to it. It's got a fault contract. It's got a couple of a data contract that's associated with it as well. And I've built this in code in my particular project. Now, you can imagine certainly starting from, in many cases, it's likely that you're starting from maybe just the WSDL. So I'm starting from WSDL, and what the experience would effectively be is you could then generate this contract and be able to pull it in. And we're looking at what we can do to make that kind of fully integrated in Visual Studio instead of having to do like a SVC util action outside of VS, generate the contract, pull that in. We're going to try to get those integrated by the time we release. All right, so I've got this contract. Now, what I want to do with it is I actually want to effectively import it into my project. in terms of a workflow way that my workflow understands. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click, and I clicked Import Service Contract, and this will pop me up the WF4 type browser. I can then dive into all of the types that I'm referencing that actually have service contract attributes on it. In this case, I've got iUpholster. I can click OK, and what that's going to do, it's actually going to generate a bunch of stuff behind the scenes. It actually is generating activities that I can then use within my workflow. So I'm going to go ahead and build that just so we can kind of see the experience. And what we'll see is, in the toolbox, I get these pre-configured activities. They're actually not activities, they're activity templates that I can then drop down on my canvas. And these are actually fully configured, so I've got, this is a two-way operation. I've got a receive, a send reply activity. These are now fully configured receive and send reply activities that match my contract. So I've got all the parameters that I would expect. I can enter C# expressions to go bind them to particular workflow variables. And I can do that for all of the contracts that are within all of the operations in my contract. Now you'll notice I actually start getting validation errors and validation warnings. So I actually get a warning here that says operation vote is not implemented in the workflow. So you can already see I start to get kind of design time validation saying, hey, you've got to actually do some work here and make sure that that you've implemented your contract correctly. All right. Now the other thing I can do, and let me just fix these validation warnings real quick, just by tying these two things together. All right. Oh yeah, and this one actually had the fault in it. And so what I've actually been generated here is I've got both, in the default case, I can send the usual reply, or if I'm in the fault case, I can send the actual fault from the workflow. So I've got kind of all of those fully integrated into my experience. Let's just hard code that for a second. The other thing is, if my contract changes, so imagine I'm dinking around in here, and I decide, I actually want to add another integer. Maybe it's the number of voters. So we kind of cap the number of voters. Now you'll see that what I actually get within the design experience is I'm going to start to get validation errors in my error list that show me, hey, there's this parameter that you don't have. You better make sure you go update your workflow because it's not matching the contract right now. So that I can go fix that error. So that's effectively the experience for contract first that you get within Visual Studio. And let's jump back to slides right now and keep moving because as I mentioned, we got lots of material. Keep making sure that we move forward. So the next one I wanted to talk about is versioning. How do I think about side-by-side versioning? And you're probably asking, well, what do you mean by side-by-side versioning? Well, imagine a mortgage approval process. So you got this mortgage approval, and it's running, and it's doing fine, and then all of a sudden, mortgage regulations change. And as of a particular date, you actually need to start using a new version of the process. And so what you actually do is you go deploy the second version of that process. But you want the existing mortgage applications to continue executing with the process that was defined to them. So you've kind of got this side-by-side execution that's going on. And effectively, how this translates into workflow services is the semantics are any new messages that come in for maybe new applications will start based on the latest version of the process. So this kind of latest version. Existing instances can continue to receive messages and continue to execute as if they were using their original version. And so these two parts are really key. And what we do within Workflow Service Host to make this happen is we effectively expand Workflow Service Host. Instead of being tied to a single XAML-X definition like it was previously, we make it a multi-version host. Now you've got multiple XAML-X's you can associate with the host, version 1, version 2. They're all hosted at the same endpoint. And that's key because what you actually want is you want your client to effectively not see the difference in many cases. So you don't have to kind of pop a router down, route to this version if it's, if it's this date, or route to this version if it's that date. All of that can be handled just by what we call workflow identity. And workflow identity is effectively this version information about the process that we will stamp on each individual workflow instance. So now each instance knows what version of the process am I supposed to be associated with, such that the client, when it sends a message, again, continues to work as you would expect. So let's take a look at what that looks like in Visual Studio here. All right, so here I've defined, I basically filled out the rest of the Polster app. Okay, so I actually used Contract first. I built out a nice MVC, ASP.NET MVC3 based interface for it. I've actually got a WCF service that manages kind of the history of my polls and kind of what polls are available to the client. And so what you'll see is I can go launch this now. So go host in IIS. And actually, I can go interact with kind of the V1 instances that I have there. I can go create new ones. So I've got a couple of polls here. Any particular one there? How about who's your daddy and what does he do? Anyone? Arnold reference? No? He's a governor, an actor, kills predator or something. I don't know. Arnold, how about, are you cloud powered? You guys have probably heard a lot of this. Hopefully you haven't had that experience. All right. So, and one more, sorry. What? What does that mean? And who's the one? John from Turner? Are you here? It's probably John. Yeah, I knew it. I knew it was you. All right. Now what I can do is I can actually go and I can create new polls based on this kind of existing version, right? I can go create a new poll. I can define, let's see, the poll ID. Hello. Poll name. Any polls going around? How about who will win the NBA Finals? Any basketball fans out there? Give me a woo. Woo! All right, yeah. Bulls? I hear Bulls. Yeah? Bulls, not the Mavs, really? My buddy's a Mavs fan, so I'm kind of partial. Anyway, Chicago, Dallas, Miami. Who else do we got? Oh, we got the Oklahoma City Thunder. They're the zombies. They deserted us from Seattle. Ugh, how dare they? So we can start a poll, and we'll put it out there for, this is just 600 seconds. This is a time span. And we create the poll, and then we can go vote on the poll. And so we got this poll workflow running now, and if I go try to vote for it, one thing it's going to do, it's going to force me to log in. I've just kind of got the rudimentary kind of login, and then I can go vote for my buddy's allegiance. Dallas, all right. But what you'll notice is if I go out and if I go try to vote for that poll again, I'll actually receive an error. What does it say? Well, it says, voter Dave 2, he's been rejected. You can't vote more than once. And this logic is actually being enforced by my workflow, all right? So we go take a look at what this workflow process is doing. So it's going to start a poll. It's going to receive that start poll request, send the reply. It's going to call out to the WCF service, add poll, just start this poll. Then it's going to delay for a certain amount of time in parallel with kind of some additional work that it's doing over here. And what this does is effectively, this is going to set a timer that is effectively the duration of my poll. So we're taking advantage of long-running behavior here, right? Now in this flowchart, what you'll see is that it's actually never ending. So regardless of whether the vote succeeds to be tallied or not, I actually always go back to vote. So this is kind of a never-ending loop, because what's going to happen is once that delay timer goes off, that'll kick me out of that parallel and drop me back into the rest of the workflow. But I've got some logic here that's configured such that I tally the votes and I record who voted such that they can't vote again. And that's great. And that particular instance that we started, we can actually go and look in the instance store, and we can see that, hey, that instance is actually stored. It's durably stored. In fact, what we've got is we've got a bunch of information, kind of new information that wasn't there previously, related to the version. So this is a pollster workflow. It's version 1.0.0.0. And where that's actually coming from is what we've added on the root workflow service is this concept of workflow identity. So we've got this definition identity. It's defined. This process, any instances created from this definition are version 1.0. And that's great. But what I can do now is I can actually go add a new version. So this particular gesture, we're struggling with what the Visual Studio gesture should look like here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a copy of my existing workflow, and I'm going to copy my existing version, my 1.0, to a particular directory. And I'll show you a little bit later why I'm doing that. But if we create a copy of this one, we paste it back into place, and it is key to have it in place. So this new version, I'm going to go edit the one in place now. This new version, it needs to be the next version, right? So we're going to go up and edit the properties for this and make this version 2.0. And what am I going to do with version 2.0? Well, let me change the logic of this workflow a little bit. Let me actually expand it such that, well, if your name is Dave, then you can actually vote multiple times. So I'll make it such that anyone named Dave, we're able to vote multiple times, no problem. All right, so now I've changed my process. I've changed my version such that you'll see now new instances being created on this version. And now if I F5 this, we can go start interacting with this service again. So again, we'll go and we can create a new version of this process, or a new instance of the latest version. So if we go to admin, I'll create another new poll. All right, create a new poll there. And then we can go test that, make sure that it's actually hitting the latest version. So I've got that poll created. If I go back, I should be able to actually start voting twice if my user account is Dave. So let's see that it's actually done that correctly. So I can vote for Booyah. And I should be able to go back and vote again without receiving an error. There you go. So now you can clearly see that this is V2 of my process that's running, right? I've got this new version that has new logic. The cool thing is I can actually go back and vote on the existing ones as well. Again, the endpoint hasn't changed. It's just that both of those definitions are going to be loaded into the workflow into the workflow service host. So if I say vote for Miami, you can see I can still interact with this process. I can still vote. And if we jump to SQL, we should see both of these instances in here, unless the other one's finished already. Yeah, the other one finished. Oh well. Anyway, you see the old version. I've set the timer too low on the other one, so it actually the instance completed. All right. So that's side-by-side versioning. As you can see, leverage the same endpoint, basically hide two versions behind that endpoint such that the client doesn't know one way or the other if it's interacting with V1 or V2. That's great. All right. Now, in that list of the top 10, there were, a number of other things that I could have shown. And Ron is obviously going to show off State Machine tomorrow and spend some time on that. We have a number of different improvements, areas of investment that we're making. And again, I want to reiterate, we need your feedback. We need to know, what is it that you're having problems with? What is it that's not meeting your requirements? Because we can absolutely roll that into our next release. But wait, we got a bunch of more content to go through. So let's talk about AppFabric and how workflow fits into the AppFabric story now. Well, hopefully you've seen this slide already. In fact, I would wager a bet that 99% of you have seen it in one session or another. We have been talking a great deal about AppFabric and kind of the next release of it and how it will work kind of both in the server and cloud environment and provide this next-gen middle-tier platform that you can rely on. But there are a couple of key pieces in this diagram that affect what the workflow experience is. In particular, the developer tools section, obviously, will impact what your workflow experience is within Visual Studio. So we're going to actually take a look at what that experience looks like. And then the AppFabric Manager part, we're going to spend some time looking at what's the management experience. Because the fact is, workflows have kind of unique requirements on management. We've got long-running processes. We've got a number of instances that we're trying to manage. We're terminating them. We're suspending them. We're looking at kind of what's my workflow instance creation rate. All of that's within the AppFabric App Manager. And so we're going to look at that experience as well. And then finally, I want to save time at the end to spend time talking about this AppFabric container. What does the host look like? And how does workflow leverage it in order to get things like scaling out workflows and a multi-tenant environment? And we're going to actually look at that one kind of in a little bit more depth. But even before we do that, let's again step back and say, why workflow in AppFabric? Why is it interesting? And the analogy that I kind of started to think about was, imagine it's kind of like a tandem bike. You got workflow, you got AppFabric, they're riding, they're kind of happy, they're having a good time, and everything's great. Unfortunately, the tandem bike analogy kind of broke down because I started to think about, have you guys ever seen that like Simpsons episode where they got Mr. Smithers and Mr. Burns riding on the tandem bike? And yeah, and it's basically chauffeur mode, right? I mean, Smithers is doing all of the work, all of the heavy lifting, and Burns is doing nothing. And then sure enough, by the end of it, Burns is rushed to the ER, and Waylon Smithers just kind of lies there. He's been stung by a bee. Anyway, that story probably doesn't make sense unless you saw it. I just realized that now. You're probably like, what? Where did the bee come from? This doesn't make any sense. Anyway, I won't bore you with those details. But anyway, that's where I felt like the tandem bike story broke down. But effectively, we don't want it to be like that. We don't want kind of, AppFabric to be pulling workflow along or workflow to be pulling AppFabric along. We actually think these two pieces have a ton of value to add to each other. And so in particular, AppFabric brings to workflow a couple of key things. One is this host for your workflows. So you don't have to go build a console app or a Windows service to host your workflows or leverage IaaS necessarily, which is, it provides you a great messaging platform, but maybe not as much as what you need. The great thing is AppFabric can provide this very rich host for us to leverage. The other piece is that AppFabric provides this container, right, which allows us to provide very high scale and a nice multi-tenant environment for leveraging workflow. These are just a couple of the value adds that we feel like AppFabric has now brought to the workflow table. Let's look at the flip side. What does workflow bring to AppFabric? Why is it important to have that? Well, the first is you've modeled your long-running business process, and maybe it's not doing any work for a certain amount of time. So you want kind of this nicely efficient kind of load or episodic execution cycle that you can leverage. And workflow is great at that. Workflow is long-running. It is all about long-running behavior, right? That's one of our core scenarios. The next is around orchestration. So I've got a bunch of service calls that I want to make, and I want to, I'm calling out to all these different services. I want my workflow to be kind of the coordinator of all of the stuff that's going on. And that's great. Workflow is a coordinator. We love that. We provide value there. The next is around application visibility. This is, again, being able to very clearly see your application, what it's doing, and where it's going to go next. And again, workflow provides this out of the box. And then finally, workflow is a great model for custom kind of authoring environments and these custom design experiences. And we bring that again to AppFabric. So, being able to leverage the fact that maybe in this cloud environment, I want my users to be able to define workflows, but I want you to host them all in some nice, isolated, multi-tenant environment. Great, we can do that. Now, these 4 points, hopefully they're familiar to you. We went over them at the beginning. These are the 4 value props of workflow, right? The fact is, we actually think there's one more that workflow and AppFabric can really provide. And this is around building scalable and consistent applications. And what do I mean by that? Well, we are going to spend a little bit of time later talking about consistency. But really what I mean is state consistency. So I've got a bunch of messages flowing. I've got state that's associated with my business process. How do I make sure that all stays consistent and I don't have to kind of jump through hoops in order to know the overall state of my process? We think workflow can add a whole lot of value here. So we're eager to hear what you guys think on this as well. Now, when we were stepping up and thinking about workflow and in AppFabric, we had a couple of design goals in mind. One was provide a good authoring experience that's integrated into the AppFabric experience and make this the next kind of evolution of DebF4, taking it forward, providing you a great new host, providing you with kind of activities that match the platform and allow you to leverage all of the richness that all of the other AppFabric services provide. And this is one key point I'm gonna dive into. We'll show a brief demo of what does workflow and AppFabric look like in just a little bit. The next is around a deployment and management experience that you can leverage. We want to make sure that aligns with AppFabric and that we provide the right metrics out such that you get a really solid experience for managing your workflows. Something that is also customized to the workflow experience. You're dealing with long-running business processes. You want to be able to kind of see all the instances that you have in flight, be able to measure them and interact with them through the AppFabric application manager. Still getting my head around that terminology. Yeah, sorry. We've gone through iterations on naming, and naming is a really hard problem. Getting it right. It's got to be intuitive, right? Yeah. All right. The next is around hosting these workflows. We want to be able to host them at high scale and, as I mentioned, high density. So pack a bunch of workflows together, make sure that they run safely in this multi-tenant environment. That's huge. And then finally, when it comes to leveraging kind of the messaging infrastructure, we want to leverage what Service Bus is providing. So by show of applause, again, how many people have learned about Service Bus this week a little bit? All right. Good. That's great. That's great to hear. So hopefully you've heard a lot about these new capabilities that Service Bus provides for pub/sub messaging and durable queues, because we think these lend themselves to workflow just so beautifully. And we'll go into details as to what that messaging pattern looks like and how we're able to leverage Service Bus to manage our state and effectively provide us with scale out and these nice patterns like pub/sub. All right. let's jump back into a demo. And we'll look at the AppFabric experience for workflow. So here we go. I'm in Visual Studio here. I want to create just kind of the most basic app with a workflow. So I'm going to start, and really we've got two models that hopefully you've learned about already. One is kind of this top-down model where I'm starting from scratch and building out my app. And so I'm going to go create a composite application, just kind of this empty AppFabric application project or solution. And then what I can do is I can go add services to it. So I can go add a workflow. And what this is going to add is a nice XAML-X experience, the one that you're used to seeing for building out workflow services. All right, this is really has very, very, very few differences. In fact, we'll see how we can leverage kind of existing XAML-X solutions and pull them into this AppFabric world in just a second. But you can see I start with, kind of the usual receive, send, reply activities that I'm used to using. And I'm going to go manipulate the contract here. We've been talking a little bit about kind of polls and that kind of stuff. So I'm going to take maybe some poll information, and maybe we'll just kind of spit out, I don't know, we'll spit out my favorite poll. Who's your daddy and what does he do? If I could say it in a nice Arnold accent, I would, but honestly, you don't want to hear that. All right, so I can go kind of customize this all I want, but then I need actually something to consume this workflow, right? So I can go, maybe I'll use an ASP.NET page. So we'll add, again, from this kind of what would you call it? The app kind of centerpiece from the designer, the application designer. I can go add this new web project, and this will add it to the manifest. And I can go interact with this all I need to. But now what I need to do is actually, I need to wire these two things up, right? And so in order to do that, I need to actually go expose the endpoint that I want to use on the workflow. So I'm going to expose, I've got iService within my workflow, so I'm going to click that one. And that'll expose an endpoint, and I'll change the visibility of it. This is just kind of a couple of workarounds that we have to do because of these, as I mentioned, these are kind of early bits. So I've got this endpoint now set up, and I should be able to now go add a service reference to this particular endpoint. So now I'm wiring up this ASP.NET page to my workflow, and that's going off and going to generate me a proxy, actually, that I can use that I'll show you within the ASP.NET code. All right, so we got that down now. And if I go off and build, now you'll actually see a couple of errors pop up. These are validation errors. And the fact is that my workflow requires a couple of additional configuration steps. It's actually asking for some service bus stuff. It's saying, hey, you need a valid service bus URI. Well, this is kind of the side result of the fact that we actually leverage service bus and kind of the durable messaging in order to get messages into your workflow, in and out. And we'll go into details as to how that works in a little bit. But I'm just going to kind of pull off this data that I have in order to go configure the workflow, and then we'll show it running. So all of this would be copied, obviously, from your AppFabric Azure AppFabric portal. I've just kind of got it stowed away here. All right. Now the other thing I need to do. So everyone, close your eyes for a second. No, seriously. No, I'm just kidding. You don't have to do that. There's one more kind of workaround I need to do right now, which is as I mentioned, just a workaround. It's nothing you need to be worried about at all. Maybe I should start singing and dancing while I do that. Maybe that'll distract you guys. No? Anyone? No, not really. All right, never mind. All right, if I go build that again, we'll see that that's all wired up. Now the only thing I need to do is within my ASP.NET page, I need to actually go put in some logic such that I actually fire at that endpoint. So we'll go over to my default ASPX, and I'm a hardcore ASP.NET developer, and by that I mean not at all. And so I'm going to actually go and just kind of drop down a couple of things here. So we're going to do, we need a button, and then we need to kind of show the output. There we go. All right. Okay. Now I need to actually write some code to basically call that service, so leveraging the proxy that's actually been generated for me underneath the covers. I'll add a couple of statements here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually leverage this kind of iService contract that was generated for me. So I've got iService. It's basically just a transparent proxy. So it's kind of like a WCF proxy, if that terminology is familiar to you. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to actually call out to my currently executing service, and I'm going to resolve the import for it. And this code, again, is, it's pretty rough right now. It's an area that we feel like we can do better. We can just kind of give you a proxy object that does this all under the covers. So don't get too caught up on this particular piece. So I'm going to resolve my reference to import 1, and then I can actually go and call get poll data. And I can pull that down into a string, and then basically just surface it to my ASP page. There we go. All right. So now I'm going to actually take this, and I'm going to go and actually have it deployed and be able to run it. So we'll do a Control F5 experience here. And what this is going to do, and because this is, I didn't set up the emulator, so this is going to take a little bit, but it's actually going to set up a bunch of kind of Azure existing emulators, and then our Windows Azure AppFabric emulator on top of that. So while it's doing that, actually, let me move on to the other example, and we can come back and see this run. The other one that I mentioned was effectively the Pollster app. So this is our app. It's got an ASP.NET page. It's got that WCF service. It's actually got 2 endpoints on this WCF service, one for communicating with the ASP.NET page, the other for communicating with the workflow. And what I'd really want in this particular model is I want to be able to leverage the existing work that I've already done. So I've already built my workflow in a separate project, right? And I just want to be able to pull that in. Well, I can do that. I can just do add existing project. I can go point at my workflow. There's my workflow. And you can see that's pulled right into my app definition. And this is my workflow that I had before. It's actually effectively the exact same workflow. It's a XAML-X. It's leveraging the receive and send reply activities. It's got the same faults and send replies. Everything's all kind of configured the way you would expect. The one piece that's missing from this workflow right now is those calls out to the WCF service. So if you recall in the last demo, I actually had a couple of points where I'm calling to my WCF service. Oh, good, and this is launching. Look at this, multitasking. This is wonderful. Hopefully you guys aren't like horribly confused at this point. You're like, which demo is he doing? Is it that one? Is it this one? All right, here we go. So we've got our ASP.NET page. I'm gonna click the button, and that should go invoke the workflow. And again, this is leveraging Service Bus. So we're actually dropping a message in a queue, picking it up from Service Bus, formatting the reply, popping that back into a queue as well, and then being able to pick that up from the page. So this is all kind of happening underneath the covers. And this provides us with kind of consistent messaging and scale out, as we'll get into in just a second. So there we go. We called the workflow. Who's your daddy and what does he do? How about that? All right, let me jump back again to the Polster app. So here I'm back in my app, and I actually need to just set up the references to the various pages, right? So what I've got to do here, the workflow is calling a WCF service, and this is one that we haven't looked at yet. So what's my experience for workflow consuming a WCF service? Well, it's simple. I'm just going to add a service reference just like you would any other reference. So I'm going to add a service reference to this iPolster history. We'll add that. And what this is going to do behind the scenes, just like our add service reference experience in Workflow 4, it's going to actually generate me activities. So now that I have these activities, I can go drop them into my workflow and be able to leverage the WCF service very simply within my workflow. All right, here we go. So if I take a look in the toolbox, there we go. I've got those activities, add pull. I can just kind of drag and drop them right down, and then update pull results after. All right. So that is the experience. So you've got kind of the top-down experience where I'm starting from scratch. I'm kind of developing an app. I add services via that AppFabric designer. And I've got the kind of bottom-up approach. I've got existing projects. Let me pull them in. I can leverage them within this design experience, and then I can just wire up the references as I would kind of any other app. All right. That is great. Let's jump back. All right, we're doing all right on time here. Let's keep moving. So we've got the next thing that I didn't get to spend much time on there in that demo was around management. So the fact is, Workflow provides a bunch of very interesting metrics that we want to be able to surface to AppFabric and the dashboard. The first is around instance status. So can I go and actually manage my workflow? Can I see what part of the process it's at and be able to kind of suspend it or terminate it? All these things you want to be able to do within that AppFabric application manager. And we're working towards providing those. They won't be there in CTP 1, but it is something that we're continuing to push for, obviously, because this is a huge part of the workflow experience. The next thing's around health monitoring. This is kind of your perf counters for your workflow process. And other things like rich tracking information that you would expect to see as well. Now the last one on this list is actually kind of interesting. And this goes back to the value prop that I've talked about, that workflow provides application visibility. So I should be able to see a nice kind of representation of what my workflow, where my workflow's at within the UI. And so, sorry, this is the instance management, the existing kind of metrics that are there, and then this is this web viewer that I mentioned. What we're hoping to provide, kind of in the kind of release time frame, is this great kind of UI for being able to see, you know, what's my workflow process done? How many instances have made it down this path? And be able to show that to you very clearly. You know, if there were particular errors at a certain step, then you should be able to see those very clearly here. And so this is an experience that we are hoping to provide. And again, we're looking for feedback. If you think this is, you know, not useful, not interesting, throw now, because this is the time to provide feedback. Okay. Finally, let's talk about the messaging specifics of AppFabric workflow and the workflow host that you're using within AppFabric. Well, in order to do that, let me set some context. First, in WF4, this is the model that you would use for, you know, scaling out your workflow service, your workflows. So you're going to set up a bunch of nodes hosting workflow service hosts. And this is a nice kind of physical view where you're going to sit them behind a load balancer, and they're all going to be hooked up to the instance store. And what's going to happen is a message is going to come in for a particular instance. And that message is going to go to a host, and we're going to actually pull the instance from the store and lock it to that host, right, while we process that message. And in fact, all of this is frequently done under a distributed transaction, right, to maintain consistency, make sure that you're not losing state or dropping messages, and that your messaging and your instance state stay consistent. So we lock the instance to that particular host while that processing is going on, and that's fine if your messages are kind of coming in periodically, right? No problem. So once that instance is done processing, we're going to persist it back to the store, and it could be opened up at a different host when the next message comes in. The problem comes when you've got multiple messages that come in for the same instance, kind of in a small time frame. Because what's going to happen now is the second message is going to come in while that's locked, and it's going to throw an instance locked exception. And our SQL workflow instance store implementation does handle this and does kind of exponential back off and retry. But the fact is that you can already start to see there's a bunch of thrashing going on. I'm losing scale as a result of building it out like this. Well, how do we think about this in AppFabric? Well, think about kind of the same diagram, but it's actually more of a logical view. So when a message comes in to kind of the workflow host, what we do is actually the state of the instance is stored in Service Bus. The message that's coming in is stored in Service Bus. Those things are actually together. The thing that this does for us is that we can actually load both the instance state and the message state under a single transaction, and be able to effectively just kind of process that and then spit it back to disk. So all the messages are being delivered directly to the instances. This is message to instance, instead of the model that we just looked at before, which was kind of instance to message, right? I brought the message to the instance as opposed to the other way around. So in this case, you're leveraging kind of your correlation semantics to make sure that you're hitting a particular instance. And the great thing is, no matter how many units you kind of throw at this, whether you decide, I just need one workflow node that is going to process all these instances, or I want to break them up into kind of individual nodes handling different instances, all of that is effectively transparent to us. And the reason is that all of our state is stored in Service Bus. So all of the statefulness of your application is in a central location. And that's great because our workflow host ends up effectively being kind of stateless. You know, it doesn't matter which host this actually, this is rehydrated on, because we're going to process it in the same way. We're just going to pull all of the state that's relevant for this particular instance. And that's great. That's one way that we leverage Service Bus for communication. The other way is providing as I mentioned, this kind of consistency model. So eventual consistency is, if we look back at the WF4 model, you've got this exactly once delivery guarantee that's guaranteed via the fact that you're using transactions, right? You've got a distributed transaction. We make sure that we flow that transaction in. We load from the database under that transaction. We do all the processing of the message. We save under that transaction, and that's great. The fact is, again, with Service Bus and being our single resource manager, what we can do is incoming messages come in, they get delivered to that instance, in the instance state in particular. Then those can all be picked up by the host, and the host will process that message, and maybe it does a bunch of sends. Well, what actually happens now is those messages won't actually be sent out at that time. They'll be effectively collected together, and you're intending to send them at some point. And that some point is effectively on this checkpoint. So as soon as your workflow reaches its next idle point, then we can go off and we can save all that state back to Service Bus, and then we can go out and send all those messages that you had intended to send. And so you already start to see this kind of episodic execution that we have being formalized a little bit more into the workflow But you don't really need to deal with it at all. In fact, it's all happening under the covers because you're still just modeling your workflow in terms of receives, sends, send replies, etc. So all of that's going to be pushed out together, and your app remains consistent again with itself. So the messages and the instances, you're in a happy place. That's the eventual consistency model that we're kind of pushing down. And we think this is a huge value add, especially in Azure, where you don't have the Microsoft Distributed Transaction Coordinator to rely on. So you're having to build your apps in kind of a bunch of wonky ways. Maybe you make sure that you detect duplicate messages on your particular service. Or maybe you go through the work of actually making all your services idempotent such that it's resilient to duplicate messages. These are problems that you can run into in a number of cases if you're not thinking about the consistency of your messaging. And so we think that workflow provides value here. Again, love to hear feedback. All right. Okay, we're doing pretty good. We're almost at the end here. Let's talk just at a high level. Here's how we think about workflow and messaging. So we talked about receive and send reply and how they're tied to kind of an infrastructure service bus at this point. And that's great. You could imagine popping a WCF endpoint on that, making that accessible just like you would. But I know some of you are probably scratching your head thinking to yourself, now what about these low latency scenarios? I've worked with BizTalk for a long time, and how do I achieve low latency scenarios? And that's a great question, and that's absolutely one that we want to go ahead and tackle. And that won't be available in CTP timeframe, so everything is kind of this brokered communication with workflow in the CTP timeframe. But we, like I said, we aim to tackle that problem because we really think it's core to continuing the workflow 4 story. All right, on the client side, if I'm consuming a bunch of services from my workflow, I've got a couple of options. One is I'm leveraging something like a service bus queue. And as we saw in the ad service reference experience, I could actually use activities that are generated based on the contract that's exposed by the consumer on the end of that queue. And so all of that's working today in CTP. The other thing you can do is just like kind of your traditional case, like we did, SOAP service. I want to be able to consume that in workflow. Well, I'm going to use the same set of activities, or I'm going to use the ad service reference experience. Again, that's all available. There are a couple of areas that we want to continue pushing forward and making sure that we address in workflow as well. And one core one is around HTTP messaging. We want to make sure that it's super easy for you to be able to call out to HTTP REST services from within your workflow. That's one core scenario. The other one is certainly around the rest of the capabilities, that kind of enterprise service bus, and being able to wire that up both on the kind of publisher and consumer side. And these are scenarios that we're serious about going after because we see just the huge value that these can provide in moving the workflow story forward. Okay, here's the list of investments. I've talked about a lot of them already. This is just kind of summarizing the areas that we're kind of continuing to push on down the road. But again, this is all open to feedback. We need to know from you guys, are we going in the right direction here? Are we building the right things, or are we way off base? So please talk to us, provide feedback, and I think that's pretty much it. So hopefully you've seen this already. This is the time frames when you can start to see some of this stuff. So CTP next month, you'll see a bunch of this AppFabric workflow stuff. And then I want to flash this slide at the end as well as we conclude that, again, workflow is constantly improving. And it's improving because of the feedback that we've been getting from you guys and that we've been trying to incorporate back into the product. So keep it coming. The other is that we have a number of different kind of investment vehicles, and this goes to the question that you asked at the beginning. When can I expect to see some of this? Well, we're investing in kind of areas all over the place, and certainly, down the road, these will all be kind of unified, and we'll get into kind of a more regular cadence of a bunch of 2 to 3 month cloud cadence and kind of 2 to 3 year server cadence. But this is where we're at right now in terms of all the investments we're making. .NET, Visual Studio, kind of vNext or Next V, now that I've been corrected, and then of course AppFabric. All right. This is just a quick slide on talk to us. We got a bunch of different ways that you can get in touch with us, and Ron is our constant kind of presence out in the ether that you can always get feedback to the product team. All right. Any questions? Any questions? We got a bunch of time left. Yeah.
I was wondering if the workflow tie-in that you had with Service Bus, if there's anything that would prevent that Service Bus from being web methods or just any other service bus.
That would prevent that Service Bus from being, sorry.
From being web methods or some other Service Bus technology.
Oh, I see.
As opposed to AppFabric.
Gotcha. So the question was, that particular Service Bus infrastructure piece with workflow, is it possible that you could go and leverage maybe some different Service Bus and hook workflow up to it? We haven't been planning for that right now. That's not kind of part of our particular roadmap. We could certainly look into extensibility around that if that's something that's interesting. I'd love to hear more about your scenario that you have in mind. If you already have an ESB, you want to basically just be able to plug in these new workflow investments to it and how we can make that happen. So let me follow up with you offline. Other questions? Comments? Yeah.
Some of the workflow tools I use leverage Visio to allow business users to kind of kick off the beginning of building the workflow.
Yep.
Any thoughts on that?
Well, so the Visio experience, so the question was, hey, there are some tools that allow you to kind of model Visio diagrams and kick off workflows that kind of look like that. What's the story around that? Well, through SharePoint, they have a great kind of rich Visio integration story there. We don't have anything planned in terms of the framework, in terms of direct integration there. But again, if it's an investment that you feel that would be really, really helpful, then we could certainly talk about it. Yeah, other question? Sorry, I'm struggling to hear you a little bit. Do you mind, do you mind using the mic if that's possible? Thanks.
So from a BizTalk perspective, there's always been a requirement where a business analyst or something could describe the process, which is later going to be something that you can generate an orchestration from.
Yep.
And I think this is kind of what you could be looking at, some other kind of designer experience that we can put out for someone else.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I mean, with workflow, part of the value certainly is around those kind of custom authoring environments. So it's certainly in your power to be able to go build that. One that's tailored to your particular user set. But I mean, feedback taken in terms of, hey, you could first class, Visio, given that it's such a common usage for, mapping out workflows and be able to suck them into AppFabric directly. So, yeah. Any other questions, comments? Anybody want to know where my next vacation is planned? No, I actually don't have it planned. I'm just kidding. All right. Thanks very much. Thanks for sticking with me.